So briefly, not only lost my video, I lost my packet. So again, welcome everybody. I'm looking at who's here. I don't think we need to do introductions, so we'll go right to the agenda. First is the summary from November 3rd. Are there any questions, comments, corrections for the draft submitted? Seeing none, we'll accept that as submitted. And next is the continued discussion of Imagine Nicholasville Road. And I believe we have some information from the planning department. So Director Duncan, do you want to take this, or Chris, whoever?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Yes, in addition to what Jennifer included in the packet, we provided some additional information that is being pulled up now that Chris Woodall and his team developed. I believe you asked us to look more at ownership patterns and land use and try to see what we might be getting into if we were to pursue a government-initiated zone change for this area, and what kind of outcome we might expect just from a communication standpoint with property owners. So Chris has put that together, and then of course we have Tracy Wade, Manager of Planning Services, who previously put together the steps for what it would take to do a zone change, a government-initiated zone change. So, Vice Mayor, I'd be happy to turn this over to Chris Woodall to talk about the new information that we prepared, and Tracy be available to talk about the steps in pursuing this.
Great, thank you. Go right ahead.
All right, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Vice Mayor. I apologize if you hear I've got a minor construction project happening in my house, so I'll try to speak loud over the air compressor. But can everybody see the screen with the information? Okay, great. So as Jim said, we were looking at the ownership of this area that we have sort of defined as our study area. And really all we've done is sort of get into a little bit finer tooth grain on this, on expanding on the work that Sally had already done in terms of finding the ownership of the properties here and sort of grouping them into different chunks and getting sort of starting out macro and getting smaller and smaller just to sort of see what the potential for redevelopment might actually be here. So if you look on this first page, basically what you see is the study area, which we've expanded upon this group's recommendation to include that second row behind Waller on the south to those ones who I believe it's Forest Park. They actually front on Forest Park, but is sort of the back row on the south side of Waller. So we included that property in here as well. The majority, just to sort of recap, the majority of this property is zoned R2. We do have a couple small pockets of R3, and then the property on the Forest Park side is R1C. And then we have one small piece of property that's P1 along Nicholasville Road. So again, we've got 88 of the 94 properties. So we've got 94 total properties here. 88 of those are, we assume those to be rental based on the PVA information. So after looking at the big chunk there, we decided to break it up into two pieces. This is something we talked about as well, just to kind of look at what are the characteristics of each of those. So if you look, we've kind of called them either North Elizabeth Street or South Elizabeth Street. So the area north of Waller or North Elizabeth Street has 41 rental properties there, and it totals just over 7 acres. And you can see that there are 15 unique owners. So we've got a number of folks who own multiple properties or decent chunks, and you'll be able to see that a little bit as we move further. On the south side, we have 47 rental properties. You'll see the ones that are kind of in the light gray were not included in the analysis, and those are assumed to be owner occupied properties. There are a handful of those. But the rental properties on that, it's a larger piece. It's just over 10 acres and has 26 unique owners as well. So we do have multiple folks who are owning multiple properties in that section as well. So then what we wanted to do is to further sort of define what the redevelopment potential might be by looking at where they are intersected or sort of separated by streets. And so we looked at those, and we've got a number of these smaller chunks to see if they might be able to redevelop. So on the north side, you've got Crescent Avenue group that's just under 2 acres, as is the University Avenue group. And then the biggest chunk that fronts onto Waller on that north side is the University Avenue section that has 21 properties and is 3.5 acres. And then as you go onto the south side, we're looking at about 6.5 acres worth of property on the Waller Avenue Forest Park side, 29 properties. And then as you move closer to Nicholasville Road on the south side, you've got 10 properties here on the Waller Avenue Forest Park. That's just about 2 acres. And then on the corner section there, you've got 8 properties. That is about 1.5 acres in total. So then what we wanted to do is show you all where people own multiple properties that are adjacent or close to each other. That's what this last map is showing here. It's showing folks, and you can see there are a couple of landholders that own significant chunks on both the north and the south side. But this is where property owners have adjacent or near adjacent properties. So this might tell us where some sections where it may not develop as a whole or redevelop as an entire chunk. There may be potential for smaller redevelopment. And it's also sort of illustrating the number of potential property owners that we would need to deal with in terms of rezoning that property. So again, that's about all the analysis that we've done. We just wanted to kind of show you different ways to slice the property, the study area that we've talked about, and then look a little bit further at the ownership characteristics. So hopefully this will help facilitate future conversation here about what you all want to do with this property moving forward. But of course, we can answer any questions that you all have about that too. And I believe Jennifer should have sent this out, so I think everybody has a copy of this also.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments? Can we get a full screen back, please? Okay. So I can see people, even if they can't see me. Okay, well, and I guess the question is, if there are no questions about the presentation, what the inclination is for next steps? Is this something that, given what we can see, is worth pursuing further?
Vice Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
sorry, I didn't raise my hand quick enough, but I'm trying to pull up the screen on my cell phone here so I want to make sure I understand correctly. In the legend on that last page, page 5, so all of the gray colored properties are individually owned, and we know that those people actually reside there.
No, I'm sorry, it's a little confusing.
That's okay.
Yeah, no, those are all the rental properties. So you'll see the ones that are in white are accepted out. So there's 2 properties, 3, 4 on Forest Park that are in white on that last page, and those are actually the ones that we assume to be owner occupied.
Okay.
Everything
Okay.
else is rental. It's just they were not adjacent or near adjacent in ownership.
Okay. And if I can follow up, just so on the last slide, there's a lot of properties that are in gray. Does that mean that they are individual ownership rental property?
Well, and again, I think it's possible that some of the we just tried to show those that were adjacent. So it's possible that some of those property owners that are shown might own a property that's not adjacent. So I would go to get a full idea of how many property owners we're talking about. If you go to page 2, where it breaks it up into those two different, the north and the south, there's for that north one, there's 41 parcels, 15 owners.
I see. Okay.
Okay, I'm trying really hard to follow, and I'm trying not to be difficult or complicated, but I keep looking back because of maybe the colors draw me to page 5, but they're in the legend. All of the colors are represented except for the gray.
Right. And what we are trying to do is all those that are in gray are in not adjacent or near adjacent ownership. So the ones that are next to it or close to it are not owned by the same person, if that makes sense.
Okay.
There's still
All right.
rental units, but they're owned not by the same person.
So that's relevant. If we
Okay.
think about redevelopment, you presume that it would be much more difficult to do. If you own a property and you don't own the ones on either side of you, that's
Right.
hard. If you own a block or 2 or 3, then it makes a difference.
Okay. All right. Now I'm catching up with you. It just takes me a minute. So
No, it is a little confusing.
I'm actually surprised that there are so many varying owners, to be honest. I thought it probably would have been more centralized, but this is a very interesting situation here, or outline or overview. So all right, thanks, Vice Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Other folks, comments, questions? Okay, so what strikes me about the map is that we've talked a little bit about the difficulties of redeveloping places like Southern Drive because of multiple owners. And this looks, except for a few spots, it looks like it would have the same kind of difficulty. If we were to ask for a zone change, it doesn't mandate anything. It's permissive. And so it may or may not be something that the people who do have blocks become interested in. And, you know, if so, what kind of impact does that have? So as it happens, I know a few of the property owners who are multiple owners. And I'm trying to get my head around whether they would think that rezoning was a good thing or a bad thing in terms of their own interests. So from the planning staff perspective, do you have a sense of whether this would be seen as an opportunity or potentially a problem for some of the property owners?
But as you said, it sort of depends on what their long-term plans are for it. But certainly what we would be talking about is an upzoning that should make their property more valuable. And the folks who have these properties seemingly have them as investments and that they're rentals. So my guess is that this would be a positive thing for the property owners that are affected. But of course, you bring different personalities into that as well. So you never really know.
Well, and yes, and in this case, for better or worse, there's hardly any home ownership, and people who are going to be as homeowners negatively impacted by increased density. The people who rent there may feel differently. So let's go back to if we wanted to seriously consider this, and in my mind, it would be useful in its own right, but certainly useful as an example of what might be done along the corridor. next step would be to actually put something that a proposed upzoning text together, or do we have that already? So I was a little bit distracted at the very beginning of the meeting when Jim was talking about what we have and what we don't have. So what do we have at this point in terms of what we would need to think about next steps?
That seems like maybe it's a question for me as
Yeah.
opposed to Jim. The council or the planning commission can initiate a zone change. And really the only thing that's required is an address list and we can prepare a map associated with the address list so that it's accurately described when we initiate. It's not, there's no specific text. It's you choose the zone and the map. And then we move forward from there.
So the recommendation would merely have to have those two elements and recommendation for the zone being recommended.
Correct. So you
And I
would,
think, yeah, so we've had that, I think we've had that conversation. So does people have a strong sense at this point of whether that's something that this committee would like to recommend? I think in talking about it before, and I think our notes reflect this, that it would be preferable to go and ask the council to initiate so that it could then go to the planning commission. Is that correct? I'm trying to remember what we discussed previously.
I think we discussed both, but since this committee is a committee of the council, I think it makes the most sense for the committee to report to the council and request that initiation. And then let the council as a whole decide if they would like to or if they would defer to the planning commission.
Okay. So again, strong preferences one way or the other. How do people feel about, at this point, taking this example and making that, forwarding that request to the council? It would be, I mean, thinking the way that the council operates, this would go to the Planning and Public Safety Committee. And then if they favor it, then it would go to the full council, and then it would go to the Planning Commission. So thoughts about whether to move forward or not?
Vice Mayor,
Yeah,
this
yes,
is
ma'am.
Susan. I guess I wonder what, we know what both sides of the equation looks like if you engage with the property owners in this area to get some feedback. And I realize that can be just as much of a good thing as it can be a bad thing, but I am just wondering, I know that if I own property over in this area and we were having these discussions, I would feel that it'd be better to have me at the table before the council takes it forward versus letting them hear it in the media and then attempts to garner their support at that point, or probably definitely not garner it. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that, or how one might perceive to make sure that we're collaborative versus just the big government hand reaching out and doing what we can do.
Well, I'm always in favor of the big government hand, but in this case, maybe I'll make an exception. I think your point is very well taken. So what that would entail, I assume, is a letter to the property owners, basically indicating the conversation that this committee has had and what we're thinking about, and an invitation to, I don't know which way to handle it. So we could, try and set up a Zoom meeting. We could, all kind of different ways we could handle this. But I think, again, I would just defer to staff to help us think about the mechanics of doing something like that, but I see that Stan has his hand up. So Stan, comment?
Yeah, I mean, likewise, I defer to staff and others, but I would suggest you're even more proactive than that. I mean, it would seem like you could convene and offer to have a focus group meeting with some of the property owners and discuss why we're even thinking. I think it's a positive for the property owners. I don't think it's going to take anything away. It's just going to give them more flexibility, and it's going to, you know, look at possible ways to improve it. I think we may have to illustrate what those ideas are, like what could change there. I think people will struggle to understand and would want to know, Tracy, what planning staff and, you know, might think is an appropriate upzoning in a sense. And I think you would want to do the same thing with Elizabeth Street neighborhood or any neighborhood associations. You know, I might suggest they be separate for now, just to kind of have candid conversations. And then we also talked about bringing the planning commission, at least making them aware of the discussion as well. I still think, I mean, I understand that council would be a logical place to instigate, but seems like the planning commission would want to be on board with it too.
Okay, thank you. Walt?
Stan just kind of stole my thunder a little bit. I think in communications with the property owners setting anything up, it'd be important to include the differences in the zoning. I mean, even maybe the specific zoning language and something explaining what the differences are, because I don't think you can assume that the owners of the rental property understand zoning very well, because some of them are not in there for that purpose. Beyond that, I agree that it's important to talk to property owners before sending it to council, as well as any active neighborhood associations, although there aren't very many that are close.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Lamb, your hand's still up, or?
No, I just put it back up. I was just going to ask Sally, Ms. Warfield, in your conversations, or just having been in the legislative aid seat over this area for so long, are there collaborative people over there other than when they want something or need something? It's just the truth. Usually that's the only time we hear from people. So
not much. I will say that we've got one neighborhood association barely in the Elizabeth Street area, and it's like one family, and that's it.
okay.
But I mean, yeah, you're going to want to rope them in, but I think that they're going to be probably, if assuming the university does what the university says that they're going to do, they're not going to be there very much longer, because the university is attempting to buy their house. So, I mean, loop them in, sure. Are they going to like it? Probably not. Is it going to matter much if the university buys up all the land, including their house? No, it won't. And then I think there used to be another Elizabeth Street neighborhood association. Haven't heard from them for years. But I will say this is probably close enough to 7 parks that we would probably want to just loop them in and say, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. Please don't panic.
Good luck with that.
we did look at this through the lens of where is owner occupied, where is non-owner occupied. We don't want to touch the owner occupied. You know, we really want to respect that you're primarily owner occupied, and we just want to make sure that they know that that is the thought process, not this is a giant encroaching maw of rezoning, right? And so I think that that's fair. We never hear anything from the rental properties in the areas that we're looking at on any of these maps, except we know that Crescent Ave is a mess, which we've talked about in the tax district discussions, because they aren't in the proper tax district. And so they're dumping their trash everywhere.
Okay. Well, I think it's, you know, as I always say, it's in the messaging that you start the conversation with. And so I think we have to be very careful and very, we have to think long-term about the message that we want to originally start with when it comes to this, because the first thing that comes out of our mouth is the only thing that they're going to, well, it's going to be the first thing, and it'll be a lasting impression on them. So I appreciate, and I think this is a unique opportunity, and I feel like that if we handle it properly, it can be a really good thing for that time, that space in our community. So to try to lift them up. So my 2 cents worth.
The only
Thanks,
other
guys.
thing I would add, Susan, is that, and this kind of piggybacks on what other people were saying, is when we're talking to people in the area and in the neighboring areas, why we decided, okay, we want this to be R4. And I know we were talking about B1, I think, over here in the corner, like why we drew those distinctions. You know, people are going to hear B1 and they're going to be like, oh, so it's all going to be drive-throughs and gas stations. And we need to make sure that people know that when we do this, we're trying to do it intelligently. We'll apply conditions where they're warranted, you know, those kinds of things, and not just throw out the map that says R4, B1, these are the changes, like really kind of thoughtfully introduce it. I think you're right. That's going to be very important.
Okay, thank you. Brittany?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I want to just echo some of what has already been said. I agree that this is a really big opportunity to do this carefully and intentionally, and can serve as a great example for what we could do in potentially other areas, and a real solution as we try to navigate the challenges that we're facing as a community. And I would also echo Stan's sentiment, and as we're having these conversations with the property owners and the neighborhoods and the community at large, that illustrations of what's possible can be really, really helpful, and people imagining, you know, when people hear B1, or, you know, just like Sally was saying, when people hear these zoning classifications and can't really picture what that actually means. So I think, you know, from the planning department perspective, if there's an opportunity to provide some sort of illustration for what could be possible as we're having these conversations, I think that can be immensely helpful to people to say, oh, okay, I can see what you're saying, what the opportunity is there, what we could do. And that can really help people wrap their arms around it, more so than just talking about the zoning classifications and what we hope to see. But I do think being really careful and thoughtful about the way we do it here could set up infrastructure that we could utilize in other areas with other zoning ideas to really solve some of these problems. So I'm in support and hope that we can all kind of come together and do whatever we can to make these conversations as fruitful as possible.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Just a couple of things. This may not lead to anything, but we have been contacted this week by the Kentucky Colonel, and they're wanting to do a story about State Street and the impact of student housing in the area. And so, you know, I don't know how far reaching the Colonel is as far as society goes outside of campus, but, you know, there is a little bit of interest in that. So all that to say, speaking about neighbors and property owners becoming aware of this, you know, there could already be some publicity coming about just highlighting the issues in the area right now. So it certainly could be a good time for us to follow through and have those kind of proactive conversations. And then the second thing is, just as a reminder, if we do get to the point that we're reaching out to the neighborhood and we're talking to the council and the planning commission about this and why we're doing it, is that we do have an adopted element of the comprehensive plan, the Imagine Nicholasville Road plan, which is leading us to do this. So this isn't just something in reaction to what the university is doing or some project for the IR committee. This is a bona fide implementation task that's coming out of an adopted plan. So I think we have a strong community plan that has been vetted publicly as a resource that we can use to sort of step off from when we start talking specifically about what we want to do in these areas.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
I should have waited a little longer to raise my hand because Jim covered my point, which was the Imagine Nicholasville Road. I agree with all of the discussion here about reaching out to the neighborhoods early before we take it anywhere. I think that's really important. And we could talk to them specifically about why. And the Imagine Nicholasville Road plan is a really good starting point and includes a lot of good graphics and things to help them understand what could be possible and what could change. And then also explaining kind of from the mechanics of it, the whole zone change thing about what that means for them if they choose to do nothing, right? Like if they want to continue to operate the way they're operating, and what does that mean for them as property owners, even if their zoning changes. So that's just all I wanted to add.
Thank you. Walt?
I'm thinking that we need to work on conditions, conditional zoning, because as soon as before we actually can much talk to anybody, because even the neighborhood down 7 Parks is probably not going to want drive-through fast food restaurants and that kind of stuff. And also that's important for anyone who has commercial ideas for what they might want to do with the property. With regard to the kernel, I mean, I think probably one of the things that will come up is what's going to, if that's going to change, if we're going to tell the kernel that we're looking at changing the zoning, one of the logical questions I'll ask is, well, where will the students go? Or will that create a problem for affordable housing? So that's something we probably need to think about.
So if I can weigh in on that, I think it might be premature to mention to the Colonel this preliminary conversation that we're having, so that people don't hear the first word from the Colonel or any other media source. Actually, no, there may be other. I mean, this is an open meeting, but in any event. In thinking about next steps, I don't want to put all of this necessary or request that the planning department do the heavy lifting for what else needs to be done. But seems to me what would be helpful is that for this committee for the next meeting, we've got a while. Our next meeting is not until February. But I would ask both my legislative aide and Ms. Warfield if they'd be willing to assist with. Essentially, I think what we need is at the very minimum an outline of what would be included in the information that we think it would be useful for whomever to see and a plan for engaging them. Both those things, so that this committee would see essentially what would we be saying and who would we be saying it to. And I would also defer to, again, Director Duncan in terms of capacity of the staff and from your perspective, Jim, what would be useful, helpful? How much do we need to do without drawing on your resources? And what would you rather what would you rather be driving?
Well, Vice Mayor, I do appreciate you volunteering Jennifer and Sally, because I think they can be tremendous resources for us on this, particularly and as the liaison to sort of the outreach. When it comes time to talk about the technical issues, that's where we'd certainly want Tracy and her team and Chris and his shop to be a part of that discussion. And we can certainly help, as Walt suggested, craft what a B1 conditional zoning might look like. And so we'd be happy to do all of that. But I do agree, Vice Mayor, that the initial outreach and sort of the organizing in the community, if the council office could sort of take the lead in that would be a huge relief for us. And then we'd certainly be glad to come in and provide all of the details.
Okay, and so just to be clear, I was not volunteering Ms. Warfield. I was requesting, and I think she might be interested. And I also negotiate with my own legislative aide about but I made some assumptions, and we can talk about that. But it sounds like the logistics of the outreach should be that the council, one way or another, through our staffing, should handle that. And that makes sense to me. And the technical
would be-
information.
That would certainly be helpful on our end, and we would be a
Okay.
participant, but to have you all organize that, that would be a huge lift for us.
Okay. Then I'll check with both aides and make sure that we're on board with doing that. And there may be other people within our staffing capacity who could help with that. And so I guess in my mind, the next step might be for planning staff, just an outline of what the information might be, not to generate it all at this point. And from our side, at the minimum, protocol for outreach and a list of who might be included in that outreach, so that when we meet in February, we'll be ready to basically pull the trigger and begin the outreach process before we consider next steps. But having said all that, I'm also assuming that absent information from the people we reach out to that kind of blows this whole thing up, that there is an inclination now, if all things go well, for this committee to make that recommendation at some point. That's the default. In my mind, that's the default position of the moment. Yes, we're interested in going forward, and I want to make sure that it's not just in my head. So comments or questions about that? Okay. Seeing none, I'll assume that my assumption is correct. What else can we do at this point on this topic? What else needs to be done? Other thoughts and comments?
I'd like to.
Yeah, Dennis, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm kind of late to the conversation. I didn't get on early, so I may be asking things that have already been said. But my understanding of that area is presently zoned R2, and you're talking about predominantly going to R4. I guess the reason for that is trying to increase density and give more opportunity for redevelopment.
That's correct. And
Okay.
we talked about other possible zoning, but I think, again, I'm trying to remember the previous conversation. I think the R4 well, help me remember. We bounced back and forth between either an R4 or a B1 with some significant restrictions on use.
I think that's a good idea. I don't see any of the owners, if they're investors, resisting that, as long as they understand what's involved. I looked at the list of property owners and know most of them. Be willing to help with your outreach. I haven't run the numbers, but what it would cost to acquire that property and tear it down, what you'd end up in the land. I know people are spending right at $1 million an acre for residential in that area today. They might even, that's really a primo location, they might be willing to go a little bit higher on that site to see whether someday, I guess it'll be feasible, and it'll never be feasible if it doesn't have this zoning. So I think it's a good idea. It's a step in the right way.
And if I can follow up, Dennis, and ask a question. So as you look at the maps that we've got, is it your sense that there could be some redevelopment of sub parcels, or when you look at that, do you think what really makes the most sense from a developer perspective is to try and consolidate a significant, if not all of one side or the other, or parcels? But I mean, the one part that's almost completely consolidated is Nicholasville Road or Forest Park Audubon. Looks like there's one property that's not owned by them, and that looks prime for, anyway. Your thoughts about,
I think-
likely kinds of approaches.
Over on American and Burley, I've said, I think plotting it in there and keeping some of the single family, putting some small attached housing works best on this site. And it's awfully hard to do to assemble large tracks, but this would really be nice. Someone could assemble the whole track or big tracks and, build 5-story buildings, 8 or 10, maybe even, and create something really nice rather than just, a little hodgepodge. When you have different developers, different ideas, different architecture, it's almost like you'd like to see a master plan. Would be the ideal situation. Whether that's achievable with so many owners, I don't know. Assembling land's hard work. It's costly. It's expensive.
Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts, comments at this point? If not, I think we have a path forward for next steps. Mostly staff work one way or another between now and the next time we convene. We have had as a pending agenda item the overall planning process and how that works. I would suggest that we continue holding that as a pending item, not move it up, and continue focusing on this particular conversation we've been having, and see if we can, at the next meeting, perhaps make some decisions about moving it essentially off our plate and onto the council, if that's what makes sense at that time. So yeah, Sally.
Before Jennifer and I start emailing and talking to people, I just want to absolutely confirm that the planning proposal that we saw last meeting with the R4 zoning and the B1 zoning and all of that, that's what we want to move forward with, or do we want to entertain different ones, or are we all comfortable with that? So when people are like, well, what are we looking at here? And I show them that map that we were presented last meeting, is that a thumbs up from everyone?
Okay. So my sense is that the work that needs to be done between now and then is really identifying who we need to contact and getting those lists prepared and so on, but not doing any outreach before we reconvene in February.
Okay.
And when we reconvene in February, then we would have a more detailed, at least an outline of what information we want to have, if not in maybe some greater detail that can be worked out. So something to put before this committee to say, here's who we want to talk to, here's how we want to talk to them, here's what we want to talk to them about. But between now and then, not to begin that conversation. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That works for me. Just wanted to make sure.
Yes, ma'am. Stan?
No, you just said my point. I guess I would say even further, I think it's really important to get the property owner and the neighborhood's input. I don't think we should decide what the zoning is. I think we should, that's an important step to try to understand the development dynamics of the property owners and neighborhood interest. And, I think we have a general direction, but I don't know that we need to say this is what the answer is until you do that outreach, in my personal opinion. So I think what you just suggested sounds really logical to me. And, for whatever it's worth, if we can help planning or anybody, or Sally, we could do an illustration or something, but I would love to have Dennis or somewhat other property owners input on that, just to give it a little dose of realism.
Okay, so I will I will include that in the test, and then maybe there's an informal subgroup and I appreciate the offer, Stan. That's very kind. And if Dennis, if you're willing to be a part of that conversation, it'd be great.
Sure.
So,
Let me disclose too, I do not own any property in that area. I identified that years ago as a possible area for investment, but made the conscious decision not to get involved because it was going to flip that neighborhood, and then inevitably it flipped. But I didn't. There were some pretty nice old houses in there, and I didn't really like the way that area was going, or I thought it wasn't the correct area for that, and I stayed out of there. So I don't own anything in there. I don't have a conflict.
okay, if some place down the road you got interested in that area, clearly you just have to identify, and if the committee was still having any input on that, you would have to recuse.
Yeah,
I appreciate that's good information. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody else at this point? If not, I think we know what the next step is. Yes, Councilmember Lamb? You're muted.
I was saying Richard wants to speak.
Ah,
I was pointing.
his hand is way up in the left-hand corner on my screen. I didn't see it. Richard.
I just wanted to jump in before the meeting adjourns, since it sort of felt like we were going. So it's a little bit off topic from what we were just talking about, but I just want to, I don't know if now is the right time to say something about, bring something else up, but I'd like to.
Well, we've got a little bit of time here, so unless anybody objects, you go right ahead.
Sure, yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily, I don't need to have a sort of lengthy conversation about this, but I would like to get on potentially, if our next meeting is in February, I'd really like to have a little bit of a chance to talk about on the table and its sort of role in the upcoming comp plan, because it's going to be in March. So we'd just like to get that on the agenda for February. It's coming up really fast.
Okay. And again, unless there's objection, we will place that on our agenda so that you can share that with the committee, and maybe we'll do that right at we'll put that, since it's coming right up, we'll put that at the top of the list, and I assume it won't be a lengthy presentation, but whatever you like, and then we'll go on. Okay.
Great.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Anybody else? If not, I guess it seems a little early to be wishing everybody a happy holiday, but we will not be convening before then. So I hope everybody has a good break. I know some people are looking forward to having a break without identifying who they are. So I guess happy holidays to everybody, and thank you for being here today, and we'll reconvene in February.
Happy holidays to everybody too. So thank you all for all of your efforts in our community and staying so active and doing such good work. So appreciate everybody.
I apologize for being invisible. I'll try and I'll get my techie to work on it.
Well, happy holiday.
All right. Bye-bye.